The market smell came up the stair before Juna did. Cold fish, wet rope, the sour bread the corner stall sold half price at dawn. And by the third landing it had thinned to the building's own smell, which was damp plaster and other people's cooking and the privy in the yard that no amount of winter could scrub clean. She climbed slowly. Her father's overcoat hung off her shoulders the way it had hung off his at the end, when the illness had taken the width of him, and the string bag knocked against her knee with the day's marketing. Barley, a knuckle of bone the butcher kept for her because she never haggled, 2 onions, soft at the top. Behind her the city was waking. Ahead of her was the room where no one waited, and she found, climbing toward it, that she was in no hurry to arrive. On the 4th-floor landing, the morning had already arranged its small theater. 2 women stood close by the old Orc's door with their voices pulled down to that particular pitch, the one people used near a sickbed or a grave. Except there was no tenderness under it, only the pleasure of a shared dislike. The landlord's woman was there too, a ledger pressed to her chest like a hymnal, saying the creature was behind again, 3 weeks now, and that she for one would not be sorry. Here the voice dropped further, warmed itself on the next words. Would not be sorry when the winter did what winter did. A child on the stair below reached toward the door's flaking paint the way children reach for anything, and its mother took the small wrist back without looking, the gesture worn smooth by repetition. Not that one, not that door. Juna had seen the same hand motion used on hot stoves and stray dogs. She said nothing. She had learned, on the wards, that a neutral face was a kind of door you could close, and she closed it now and went past them up the last flight, and behind her she heard one of them murmur that the nurse kept odd hours, as though hours could be a fault. Her own room received her the way it always did, which was to say it did not. She hung the coat. She set the bone to soak. She lay down in the gray work dress because undressing felt like more than the day was owed, and she pulled the blanket to her chin against the cold that lived in the wall, and she waited for the sleep that came to her now only out of exhaustion and never out of peace. And through the plaster, 2 feet from her ear, the other room began its day. She had been listening to that wall for 2 years without meaning to. You could not help it. The partition was a single thickness of lath, and sound came through it the way light comes through a thin curtain, shapes without edges. There was the stick first, tap, drag, tap, the slow triangulation of someone crossing a small space on 3 points instead of 2. There was the kettle, set down hard, the iron complaint of it on the hob. There was a long silence of the kind Juna had stopped being able to hear as restful, because she knew too much now about what silence could be covering. And then there was the cough. She knew coughs the way a sailor knows weather. There was the dry social cough, and the wet productive one, and the bark of croup, and the long whooping spasms of the children's ward in a bad month. And there was this one, the one through the wall, which began low and tore upward, and ended in a wet rattle deep in the chest that did not fully clear, that left something behind each time, a little more each time. She had sat beside that sound 100 times in the charity infirmary, holding a hand or a basin, and she knew its arithmetic. It was the cough of someone the next hard winter would finish, or the one after, but not many after that. And the person making it was entirely alone with it, on the other side of a wall thin enough to hear a kettle, in a building that was counting the weeks until it stopped. Juna lay with her eyes open in the daylight, and did the thing she was good at and ashamed of in equal measure, which was to feel nothing on her face while a great deal moved underneath. She had come to this city to be among strangers. She had nursed her father 2 years and 3 months, alone, through every stage of it, had learned his body's failures more intimately than she had ever known anything, and had walked out of that small room at the end, emptied in a way she had no word for and wanted no word for. She had decided, without ever quite deciding it, that she would not pay that price again, that she would spend her care on the ward, on people who came and went and asked nothing of her past the morning, and that her own 4 walls would stay her own. It had worked. No one on this landing knew her name, and here was the cough, arriving each day through the plaster like a bill she had thought she'd settled. That night she made too much soup. She did it without letting herself look at it directly, the way you do a thing you have decided not to have a reason for. The barley went in, and the bone, and the soft onions, and she made twice what one tired woman could eat, and while it was still too hot, she ladled half of it into the covered bowl she usually carried her dinner to work in, and she carried it instead the 4 steps down the landing and set it on the old woman's step. She did not knock and wait. She knocked once, the back of 2 knuckles, the way you rap a door frame to say, "Here," and not "Open." And then she turned and went down the stairs to her shift before the latch could lift, because she did not want thanks and did not want a face, and did not, when she was honest in the descending dark of the stairwell, fully know what she wanted at all. She only knew she could not hear that cough through that wall all day, and then lie down beside it, having set nothing down. It was not for the old woman. It was so that Juna could sleep. That was what she told herself, and it was true, and it was not the whole truth, and she went to work. The infirmary took the night from her in its usual coin. An old docker with a crushed foot, a girl with a fever they broke by morning, and a boy with one they did not. She sat the last hour with the boy's mother, because no one else would, and held the woman while the small body went still, and said the few plain things there were to say. And at dawn she walked home through the fish smell with the empty string bag and her father's coat, and a death sitting on her that she could not have prevented and could not put down. She climbed the stair, too tired to perform a neutral face, and on her own step, in the gray light, the bowl was waiting. It had been washed, not rinsed, washed, scoured to the tin, cleaner than Una had handed it over, the work of hands that had decided not to be in anyone's debt. And inside it, set square in the center where it could not be missed, lay a single dried fish, hard as a bit of kindling, brown and curled and ancient. Una stood on the cold landing and looked at it for a long moment. She knew what it was. It was payment. It was a wall, rebuilt in the only currency the woman behind it would permit herself. You will not make me a beggar. You will not make me grateful. Here is your bowl, and here is the price of the soup, and now we are square, and now you may stop. It was the most eloquent refusal she had ever been handed, and it was also, unmistakably, an answer. Because a person who truly wanted nothing would simply have left the bowl, and this person had got up on a bad night, on 3 points instead of 2, and found in her bare room the one thing she had to give, and given it. Behind the wall, as Juna stood there with the hard little fish in her palm, the stick crossed the floor once, tap, drag, tap, and stopped, and the 2 of them held still on either side of the lath, each waiting to be sure the other had gone. 2 women who had each decided for their own opposite reasons to need no one in the world, and who had just, without a single word, begun to negotiate. For 9 more dawns the bowl went down full and came back empty and washed, and something went back with it each time. A twist of coarse salt, a heel of black bread, once a single bone button, the small change of a life pared to nothing. And Juna stopped telling herself it was only so she could sleep. Then, on the 10th dawn, she climbed the stair, and the bowl was on the old woman's step where Juna had left it the night before. Not returned, not emptied, untouched. The covered dish sat exactly as she had set it down, the soup gone to a cold skin beneath the cloth. And all the day before, now that she counted back through her thin sleep, she had heard no kettle, no stick, no cough even, and the absence of the cough was worse than the cough had ever been. Juna stood at the thin wall in the cold dawn with the death of the night still on her hands, and she pressed her ear to the plaster the way she had pressed it to 100 chests, and she listened, with a nurse's flat dread, for the sound of breathing. There was no breathing she could hear, and an untouched bowl, and to Juna's trained ear those 2 facts added to only one sum. She did not knock the polite once now. She knocked hard, called through the wood, "Mistress, it's the nurse from next door!" and got the silence back. So she did the thing the building would have words about. She tried the latch, found it unbarred, and let herself in. The room hit her first as cold. No fire, the hob iron stone dead, the air the kind of damp that has had all night to settle into a body. Then she saw her. The old woman was down on the boards by the cot, on her side, one big knotted hand still gripping the stick that had betrayed her, the other splayed flat where it had failed to find purchase. Her eyes were open. They came around to Juna, and what was in them was not relief. It was fury, naked and cornered, the look of a creature that would rather be found dead than found helpless. "Out!" The voice was a ruin of itself, but it carried. "I did not send for you. Get out of my room!" Juna shut the door behind her with her heel and crossed the floor. "You've had a fall," she said, in the flat ward voice that was neither warm nor cold, the voice for people past the reach of comfort. "How long down?" "Long enough to want no audience for it." The old orc tried to push herself up on the splayed hand, and the arm shook and gave, and a sound came out of her that she hated more than the fall, a small grunt of effort failing, and the fury climbed. "I have put men in the ground who tried to lay hands on me. Touch me and find out." "You haven't the wind to break an egg this morning," Juna said, already kneeling, already reading her with her hands the way the wards had taught. Collarbone, the long ridge of the shoulder, down the arm, watching the face for the catch of breath that means bone. "And I've been sworn at by better than you, with more behind it. Hip!" She pressed. The old woman's jaw set white. "Not broken. Bruised to the bone, which is its own misery. But you'll stand on it. Be still while I find your feet for you." She had been certain there would be more fight, and there was, but it changed key, because Juna did not do the thing the old woman was braced against, did not coo, did not pity, did not handle her like something pitiful that had been found on a floor. She worked. She got a shoulder under the orc's arm and her own boot planted, and she said, "On 3, and you push when I say push. You're not a sack of meal." And the old woman, who had spent 40 years having humans either flinch from her or condescend to her, found herself instead being ordered about by a tired professional who plainly did not care what she was, only how she lifted. And to her own evident disgust, that she could work with. She pushed on 3. She came up. Between them they got her onto the cot, and Juna had the blanket round her and was down at the hob striking a light before the old woman had finished cursing. The fire was the next argument, conducted while Juna laid it. "Leave my coals! I'll not have you counting my coals!" Juna laid the fire. "You'll have charged the soup to me. You people always tally." Juna fed the small flame and did not answer. And the not answering did more than answer would have. When the warmth began to climb, the old woman's anger had nowhere left to stand, and sat down, by degrees, into something more dangerous to her, which was exhaustion let go. She watched the human work her fire with one cloudy eye and one sharp one, and she said, lower, "Why?" "Because the bowl came back untouched, and the stick didn't sound," Juna said, hands busy, not looking up. "On the ward, that means someone's on the floor. I came in. That's the whole of it." She set the kettle on. "You can pay me in fish again after, if it lets you sleep. I don't care either way." Something moved across the seamed face, not warmth. The old woman would have bitten off her own tongue before warmth, but a kind of grudging recalibration, the look of someone revising a long-held figure. Not a do-gooder, then. A worker. That she could be in a room with. It was only then, with the fire taking and the kettle ticking and the fury banked, that Juna let herself look at the room. It was bare the way a cell is bare. Everything that could be sold, long since sold. But it was not squalid. It was kept. The clean, ancient clothing folded square, the floor swept, and on the single shelf, where another old woman might have set a comb or a cup, lay a row of tools. Juna did not know stonework, but she knew the look of things that had been somebody's whole life. A set of iron chisels, points and pitchers, and a worn, flat-faced one, their handles dark and shaped to a grip that was no longer in any living hand the same way. The steel kept oiled against the rust, though there was plainly nothing left to carve. Tools kept the way she kept her father's coat. And above them, hung on a nail, on a plain cord, a small thing carved from bone, a fish hook, old as the dried fish, worn pale, the only soft thing in the room, and the only thing, Juna understood at once, that the old woman would die before she sold. The orc saw her see it. The sharp eye went flat and hard. "That stays on its nail," she said. "You've seen my floor and my fall, and that's more of me than the whole building's had in 11 years. You'll see no more." But she did not tell her to put out the fire, and when Juna set the tea by her good hand and gathered the cold, untouched bowl to carry away, the old woman said, to the wall and not to her, in a voice scraped down to almost nothing, "Vesna." A name, set down on the step between them like a thing returned. "If you're going to be in my room, you'll not call me mistress like the rent woman." Juna stopped at the door with the bowl against her hip. "Juna," she said, and went out, and stood a moment on the cold landing, with her heart doing something it had trained for 2 years not to do. And behind the thin wall, for the first time, the cough came, and was not alone with itself, because on the other side of the laugh, listening, was someone who now knew the name of the chest it tore through, and had seen the tools of the hands that built things, and could not, walking down to her shift, stop thinking of a craftswoman on a floor she could not rise from, in a building that was counting the weeks. What followed was not friendship, because Vesna would have spat at the word. It was a transaction conducted with the wariness of two animals sharing a waterhole, and Juna learned its rules fast, because she had nursed the proud poor before, and knew the one thing they could not forgive was being seen to take. So she stopped giving. She traded instead, in lies they both knew were lies and both required. "I made too much again," she would say, setting down the bowl, and Vesna would say the barley was oversalted and a waste of a good bone, and eat it. "I need that dish back. It's the only one I've got," when she had two, and the dish came back washed with something in it. A nurse learns to bring help wearing the mask of need. "The doctor at the ward gave me a twist of this for my own chest, and it'll only spoil. You might as well." It was liniment for the old woman's hands, and Vesna knew it and called Juna a poor liar, and took it. The fire got laid most evenings now, on the pretext that Juna was cold on her own side of the wall, and the chimney was shared, which was almost true. The flues did run together, and Vesna permitted it on those terms, the terms of a shared flue and not of charity, and the two rooms warmed off the one grudging hearth. The story came in fragments, never offered, only let slip, and then guarded again as if regretted. Juna learned not to ask. She learned that questions made the shell snap shut, and that silence, the patient ward silence she was good at, made it open a crack. So she sat sometimes while the liniment did its work into the knotted hands, and said nothing. And Vesna talked the way the old talk when the body is busy and the guard tires, sideways to the fire. There was a coast in it. There was salt and a different weather, and a word in the Orc tongue for the particular green of cold northern water that did not exist in the human speech, and that Vesna said once, low, and did not translate. There was a clan named the Cold Water People, and then not named again. There was the work. Juna gathered there had been great work once, work the city wanted, and the clan gave it. But the moment the work came near the telling, Vesna's mouth closed on it like a trap, and she said the liniment was finished, and the human could go. "Your hands," Juna said one evening, because she was a nurse and could not help the professional noticing. "These weren't always like this." "The way they're worn. The calluses are old, the joints went later. You worked with them. Fine work." The cloudy eye and the sharp one both came around. For a moment Juna thought she had broken it. Then Vesna spread the ruined hands toward the firelight, almost cruelly, making her look. "Stone," she said. "I read stone with these the way you read a chest, where it wants to break and where it won't. There's not a one of them," a jerk of the chin at the floor, the building, the city, "could lay a true edge, and they had the gall to call us the dumb labor." She closed the hands. "It's gone now. The cold ate the knuckles. I couldn't dress a curbstone today to save my life." And that was the most she had said at once, and she heard herself say it, and she sent Juna out into the dark for the offense of having heard. But the wall between them had stopped being only a wall. They knocked on it now, a private grammar, grown up without anyone deciding it. One rap from Juna's side at dusk meant, "I'm putting the fire on, you'll feel it your side." Two slow taps back meant, "I'm upright and don't need you, go to your work." And a silence, where the two taps should be, brought Juna to the door. Every time. Fast. The bowl forgotten. The building still whispered on the stair. The rent woman still said the creature wouldn't last. But there were now 2 of them behind the wall who heard it, and the hearing was no longer lonely on either side. Then came the thing Juna did not see coming, the thing that undid her more than the fall had. She came off a brutal night, 3 deaths, 1 a child, her hands not yet steady, and climbed the stair in the gray with nothing left in her, and on her own step there was no bowl. In its place, folded square, the way Vesna folded everything, was the overcoat. Her father's overcoat. She had hung it the morning before to brush the dock mud from the hem, and left it on the landing peg, and now it lay folded on her step, and when she picked it up, she felt at once what had changed. The lining. The lining had been going for a year. The silk perished and torn at the shoulder, where the weight of it pulled. A long, ragged mouth of a tear she had meant to mend 100 tired mornings, and never had. It was mended. Not patched, mended. The torn edges turned under and drawn together with stitches so small and so even they were nearly invisible. The work of someone who had set a true edge to stone for 40 years and could still, it turned out, on a bad night, with hands the cold had eaten, make her ruined fingers do one fine thing. Juna stood on the cold landing holding the coat her father had dyed the width of, that a stranger behind a wall had quietly made whole, and she understood several things at once and had to put a hand to the plaster to hold them. That it had cost Vesna hours and pain and the better part of her remaining thread. That she had done it at night, alone, so as not to be seen doing it. That she had left it without a word and would deny it if asked, and would call Juna a fool for making anything of a few stitches. And that this, not the dried fish, not the salt, not the bone button, this was the whole of the woman's heart, the entire hoarded thing spent on the one human in 11 years who had knocked once and not waited for thanks. Spent in the only currency Vesna would allow herself to be caught dead handing over, which was not a gift, never a gift, only a debt repaid, only good thread not wasted, only a thing a craftswoman could not stand to see torn when she had the means to mend it. Behind the wall the stick crossed the floor, tap, drag, tap, and stopped the way it always stopped when Vesna was listening to be sure she had gone. Juna did not go. She stood holding the coat, and for the first time in 2 careful years she let her face do what it wanted, alone on a cold landing where no one could see, and through the thin laugh she said the only thing she could trust her voice with, which was not thanks, because thanks would have been refused. "The stitching's too good for this old rag," she said, unsteady. "You've wasted your thread." And from the other side, after a long moment, dry as ash, came, "Then don't tear it again." And neither of them moved from the wall. 4:19. The building, which had let the night nurse alone for 2 years because she kept odd hours and gave it nothing to talk about, now had something to talk about. It started small, the way it always does. The rent woman caught Una on the second landing with the ledger to her chest and the warmth gone out of her face. "You've been in with the creature," she said. Not a question. "Carrying things up. The pals heard you in there of an evening." She let that sit. "I'll say it plain, because somebody ought. It's not natural, a clean girl thick with that. They carry things, the orcs, chest rot, the gray fever. You nurse the poor, you ought to know better than the rest of us what she'll give you. And the room," the ledger shifted, "when she goes, that room's mine to let, and I'll not have it queered with talk that the nurse had her feet under the table first. You take my meaning." Una took her meaning. The meaning was older than this building and would outlast it. After that, the landing did the thing it knew how to do. The Pell woman, who had nodded to Una at the privy for 2 years, stopped nodding. A man on the 3rd floor said something low as she passed that she chose not to hear. The child who had reached for Vesna's door was now steered wide of Una's too. The same worn hand motion, not her either. And that one landed somewhere Una had thought was scarred over. Because here it was. This was the bill. This was the precise cost she had crossed a country to avoid. Not the grief of the ward, which came and went and asked nothing, but the slow entanglement of a place, the way caring about one person on a landing roped you into the whole landing's weather. She had built 2 years of careful, friendless safety, 4 walls and no name, and she had spent it on a few bowls of barley soup. And now she stood exposed on the open stair, with the old fear rising in her like cold water up a flue. This is how it costs you. You let one person matter, and the world arranges to make you pay. She wavered. She would not have admitted it to anyone, least of all herself, but the bowl sat full on her own table 2 nights running while she lay listening to the cough through the wall and did not get up. She told herself it was only sense. She told herself Vesna had managed 11 years without her and would manage. She lay in the dark and was, for the first time, a little ashamed of the quality of her own silence, because it was no longer the ward silence of someone who could not help. It was the silence of someone choosing not to. It was Vesna who broke it, and Vesna who got it wrong on purpose. The 2 taps did not come at dusk, so Una went, could not go in the end, the trained reflex stronger than the fear, and found the old woman upright by her cold hob, fully dressed, the stick planted, waiting for her like a sentence. "I heard the rent woman on the stair," Vesna said. Of course she had. The lath that carried a kettle carried a threat. "And I've watched you not come 2 nights. Good. Sense at last." The voice was iron, deliberate, each word laid like a stone meant to wall something off. "You'll stop now. No more bowls, no more fire, no more of your lies about extra liniment. I've buried more of your kind than you've nursed, and I know exactly how this goes.
They'll make you pay for me till there's nothing of you left. And I'll not be the thing they break a fool girl on."
So, the stick lifted, pointed her at the door. "Get out. Go back to your wall and stay your side of it. I don't want you." And Juna, who had spent 10 years reading the faces of people saying the opposite of what they meant, looked at the old woman braced and rigid by a dead fire, sending away the one thing she had left, because she had watched humans punished for kindness to orcs her whole long life, and could not bear to be the punishment. And something in Juna that had been holding very still for 2 years simply gave. She did not argue. She did not weep, which Vesna would have despised. She said, "All right," in a flat voice, and she went out, and she shut the door. And then she sat down on the cold boards of the landing, with her back against the very wall she had been ordered behind, knees up under her father's mended coat, and she stayed. For a while there was nothing but the privy draft coming up the stairwell and the gaslight ticking below. Then, through the wood, low, she began to talk. Not to be answered, she made that plain by never pausing for one. She told the door about her father, about the 2 years and 3 months, the small room, learning his body's every failure better than she'd known anything. The way the illness had taken the width of him until the coat hung off him like it now hung off her. She told it about the last night, the one she had never told a living soul, sitting that vigil alone because there had been no one else, and what it had emptied out of her, the word she had no word for. She told the door why she had come to a city where no one knew her name, not for work, for the safety of it, the great relief of caring about people who were gone by morning and could not cost her anything past the dawn. "And then there was a cough through a wall," she said, "and I couldn't make it cost nothing. I tried. You felt me trying these 2 nights. Her voice was steady and low and tired. "You can tell me to go. You can't make me not have knocked." The cough came on the other side, and a long silence, and the small shift of weight that meant a body lowering itself, slow, on 3 points, to the floor, on the far side of the same thin lath, close enough that Juna heard the old shoulder come to rest against the plaster, a hand's breadth from her own. Neither spoke. The gaslight ticked. 2 women sat back to back through a wall in a building that wanted them apart, and somewhere below the stair the building slept its comfortable sleep and did not yet know that the thing it had decided did not count had just, on a cold landing, begun to count for everything. They stayed at the wall until the cold drove them, and somewhere in the small hours the wall stopped being where they talked. Juna heard the latch lift. The door came open on the old woman leaning hard on the frame, and she looked down at the human folded on her landing boards and said, with disgust worn thin enough to see through, "You'll catch your death out here, and then where's my soup?" and stood aside. So Juna came in, and they sat on the same side of the door at last, the fire laid between them, and Vesna told her the rest, because the wall had already heard the worst of it, and there was no sense being proud through plaster any longer. "You want to know what these built?" she said, holding the ruined hands to the flame. "Walk down to the harbor and look at the thing the city's so cursed proud of. The sea wall, the great gray curve that breaks the winter sea off the lower town." She watched Juna place it. Everyone knew the wall. It was on the city's own seal. "We built that. The Coldwater clan and 3 others they shipped down with us.
young and strong and stupid with hope, because the city sent word north that it wanted stonecutters and would pay. 40 years ago. I was younger than you." The sharp eye held the fire. "You don't lay a seawall in a season. You lay it in lives. The cold water I told you the word for, you stand in it to dress the footing stones, hours, days, your legs gone past pain to nothing, and the tide doesn't wait while you warm them. Men went down with the lung rot. Men went down off the staging in a sea that didn't give them back. My own people. I read the stone, and I set the true edge, and behind me they died setting it. And the wall went up straight, and it has not shifted in 40 years, and there is not one name on it. Not one. They took the wall, and they put it on the seal, and they let the workers rot in rooms like this. And when we died, they were glad of the space." She told it dry, without a tear, which made it worse. She told Juna about the children.
One daughter, taken by a fever the year the charity ward turned orcs from the door. Juna's own ward, 2 matrons back, a policy since quietly dropped and never atoned for. And Vesna said the name of it flat and let Juna sit in the shame of the institution she served. One son gone to sea at 17, and the sea had kept him, the way it kept so many. No grave, no word, just a birth that did not come back. And after them, the long arithmetic of outliving, the clan thinning, the old ones going, until one ordinary year Vesna had looked around and understood she was the last of the cold water people in this city, and likely on this coast, the last set of hands that had read the stone of that wall, the last mouth that held the word for the green of the water, and that when she went, it went, all of it, uncounted and unmarked, as if none of them had ever stood in that killing tide at all. 11 years in that room," she said. "And don't you make a sad story of it. I drove them off, every one. The do-gooders, the church women, the few orcs left who'd have sat with me. I'd sooner be feared than pitied. A curse, they call me through the wall. Fine. A curse keeps its room. A poor old thing gets managed into the ground by people glad of the bed." She turns the cloudy eye on Juna, then the sharp one. "You're the first in 11 years I didn't drive off. I haven't decided yet if that was strength or just that I'm too tired now to do it properly." Juna sat with all of it settling into her, and what struck her hardest was not the cruelty of the city, which she had always known, but the simple fact in the chair across the fire, that the building called this woman a curse to be endured till winter took her, and the truth was that a piece of living history sat 2 feet away, the last hands that had built the thing the whole city put on its seal, and not one soul on the landing knew or would have cared. 2 isolations had found each other across a wall. The nurse who tended dying strangers and went home to no one. The builder who outlived a people and chose to be feared. And they sat in the warmth and were, for one night, fully known to one person each. It was the warmest the room had been in 11 years. And it was Juna, the nurse, who could not let herself fully have it, because she had been listening to that chest all night out of professional habit, and she knew exactly what the wet rattle under the talking meant, and how few winters, how few weeks of this thin, false, warm season even it left. Is there a wall in your own life, I wonder, with someone living right on the other side of it? Not a stranger, someone you could name,
a neighbor you nod to and no more, a relative the years have walled off, a quarrel grown so old you've forgotten the shape of the person behind it. We tell ourselves the wall is theirs, that they want it, the way Vesna wanted hers. We're so sure it would cost us to knock. I think about what it cost Juna, and what it would have cost her not to. If this is sitting somewhere in you while you listen, stay with me to the end of it. And if you've ever left a bowl on a step you weren't sure was wanted, tell me below, because I'd like to know I'm not the only one. Subscribe, and let's see how the wall comes down. Vesna watched her face do its quiet arithmetic across the fire and was not fooled, because she had been doing the same sum longer. "You've got the look," she said. "The Ward look. You're listening to my chest." She did not deny anything. She reached up to the nail and touched the bone fishhook once and let her hand fall. "Don't nurse me toward something soft, girl. I know what's coming up that flue with the cold. I've known longer than you." The fire ticked. "Just don't let them do the other thing. That's all. Not the dying. The dying I can manage. Don't let them put me in the ground glad of the bed." He was waiting for her at the foot of the stair, in the cellar mouth where the one other orc in the building had his room, and Juna knew before he spoke that this had been coming. Rek was young and built like the work he did, raw-boned, dock-broad, gray-green skin gone grayer with the day's stone dust and rope tar, and tired in the body the way she was tired in the bone. He stood square in her path and did not raise his voice, which was worse than if he had. "You're the nurse. Top floor." It wasn't a question. "Been going into the old one, carrying things up. Weeks now." His jaw worked. "So I'll ask you the once, plain, and you'll tell me, plain. What is it you're after with her room?" "Her room? Don't." The single word came down hard. "I've watched this happen my whole life. An old orc gets weak, gets near the end, and that's exactly when the humans get kind. Church women, charity girls, a nurse." He said the word like it tasted of something. "Sudden in and out with the soup and the warm looks and the old one too far gone to see it. And then she's in the ground, and there's a human's name on the lease before she's cold. The room. It's always the room. You people don't take an interest in a dying orc for the love of it." "So," he folded his arms, "which is it? The room, or you're soft in the head, and I don't meet many of the second kind." Juna stood in the cold cellar mouth and made herself sit in it, because the ugly thing about what he'd said was that it was earned. Every word of it was a thing he had watched happen, more than once, to his own. She did not get angry. Anger would have read as guilt. She set the empty bowl down on the cellar step between them where he could see it, washed, with the heel of black bread in it Vesna had sent back that dawn. "I'm Juna," she said. "I live the other side of her wall." I started leaving soup because I couldn't sleep through the cough. She paid me back in a dried fish, so she'd owe me nothing, and we've been at that ever since. She'll take no charity, you know her. She'd sooner starve square than eat in debt. She nodded at the bowl. "That's her bread going back down. I don't want her room. I've got a room. I want her not to die on a floor nobody'll cross the landing for." Rec looked at the bowl a long moment. Something in the set of him was not yet convinced. Suspicion that old doesn't lift for a speech. "Words are cheap," he said. "I've heard kind words off plenty." "Then don't take the words." Juna shifted the coat on her shoulders, and he saw it then, the thing that did what no speech could. He saw the mended lining where the collar fell open, the impossible small, even stitches, and his eye, a docker's eye that knew handwork, caught on it. "She did that," Juna said quietly. "My father's coat. The lining was torn a year. She mended it one night with her own thread, and left it folded on my step, and called it not wasting good silk, so I couldn't thank her."
You tell me what churchwoman ever got that out of Vesna of the Coldwater clan? The name stopped him. She watched it stop him, saw the docker's face change as the words landed somewhere they had no business landing. "Coldwater," he said slowly. "Say that again. Her clan."
"Coldwater," Juna said. "She told me last night. She came down 40 years back with her people, young, for the stonework. They built the sea wall, the harbor wall, the one on the city's seal. The cold killed most of them in the tide, and the rest the rooms finished, and she outlived the whole of them. She's the last hands that read that stone." She did not yet understand why the big young orc had gone so still, why the dock dust seemed to stand on his face without him breathing to stir it. "Why? What is it? You know the wall."
"Everybody on the docks knows the wall."
His voice had dropped to almost nothing.
"We work off it every day of our lives. We've got our own name for it. Not the harbor wall, not the city's pretty name."
He looked up the dark stairwell toward the top floor as if he could see through 5 stories of lath to the room above.
"We call it the Orc Bone Wall, the dockers,
because the old men say it was built on our people, that there's a clan or more gone into that footing, drowned and worked to death and never named. And the city took it and forgot. It's a thing, you say, a grim thing, like a grave you walk past." He swallowed. "I've said it 1,000 times, the Orc Bone Wall. And I never once—" He stopped. "You're telling me one of them is alive? Up those stairs, one of the ones who actually built it, behind the wall the humans here call a curse." "One of them," Juna said. "Bad chest, bad hip, 73. Dying of nothing but all of it at once, and certain to her bones that she's the last of her people, and that when she goes, it all goes with her, uncounted." She picked the bowl back up, the bread still in it. "She thinks no one's left who'd know what she was. She thinks she's a ghost story behind a wall." Rex stood in the cellar mouth with the day's dust on him and his arms come unfolded at his sides, and the suspicion had gone right out of him and left something rawer in its place. A young man learning that a thing he'd spoken of as a grave had a name and a chest he could hear cough, 2 floors up, this very night.
He looked at the bowl of returned bread a long time. Then he said, low, more to himself than to her, "She doesn't know about us, the dock orcs. She thinks she's the last." And Juna saw the thought take hold of him, the thing that would carry the whole back half of it. But she isn't, and we never knew to come. And Rec turned without another word and went down into his cellar to sit with what he now had to carry to his own.
He carried it carefully because he understood what Juna had told him about driving people off. And the dock orcs understood it too once Rek had said the name. Cold Water. One of the wall builders. Alive. It went round the dockside in the way such things go, not as gossip, but as something handled, passed low between men coiling rope and women mending net. The word alive turned over and over. And to their lasting credit, they did not come in a crowd. A crowd would have terrified a proud old woman who had spent 11 years making herself a thing to be feared. They came the way Juna had first come, one at a time, to the step. The first was sea bread, a flat, dark round of it, the kind that keeps for a sea voyage, left on Vesna's step one dawn with no name and no knock, and Juna found her standing over it with the stick planted and her face a-war. "Who?" Vesna said. "Who left this?" It was not human bread. She knew the make of it the way Juna knew a cough. It was clan bread, the bread of the coast, a thing she had not seen on a step in 30 years. Juna told her the truth, because lies were finished between them, that there were orcs on the docks, young ones, dockers, and that they knew now who she was, and that this was them, knocking the only way they dared. Vesna sat down hard on the cot and held the dark bread in her ruined hands, and did not eat it for a long time, and did not weep, and said at last, roughly, to the wall, "They shouldn't have. I drove off better than them, years back. They should let an old curse be." But she ate the bread, and she did not put the rest of it out for the gulls. Then came the old docker, older than Rek by 40 years, near Vesna's own age, a man who had come down to the coast a generation after her clan, but spoke, it turned out, the coast tongue, the real one, the old northern speech, not the harbor pidgin. Rek brought him to the door and stood back. The old man did not offer pity or charity or church words. He sat down on the floor by Vesna's cot, uninvited, the way the very old sit with the very old, and he said something in the coast tongue, and Juna, on the landing, heard a sound come out of Vesna she had never heard, the old woman answering in the same speech, the words rusty and breaking and then steadying, the green water word, and 100 others she had held alone in her mouth for 30 years, with no one to say them back. They talked an hour. Juna did not understand a syllable and did not need to. She understood that a woman who had been certain the last of her language would die behind her teeth had just heard it spoken back to her by another living throat, and that whatever the dying was doing to the chest, this was being added to the other side of the ledger. Late, but added. After that they came, steadily, shyly, 1 and 2 at a time, up the stair the humans had warned them off. And that was where the building's own weather began, at last, to turn. Because the landing that had whispered the creature was a curse now had to stand at its doors and watch a quiet procession of dockers climb past, caps off, carrying sea bread and oil, and once a whole fresh fish, to honor the very old woman they'd been counting the weeks out of the world. The Pell woman, who had stopped nodding to Juna, found herself pressed to her own doorframe to let a gray-haired orc with a sailor's roll go by to sit with the witch. The rent woman came up to collect and found 3 dockers on the landing, and could not, for once, get her ledger out. No one said anything to them. No one had to. There was just the steady, unanswerable pressure of witnessed dignity, the slow public fact of a despised old woman being honored, by her own and in plain sight, that made the building's comfortable cruelty look, for the first time, like exactly what it was.
You cannot easily go on calling a person a curse while a line of people climb your stair to sit at her feet. The whispers did not stop all at once, but they got quieter, and then they got ashamed, and the averted faces on the stair began, here and there, to be the faces of people who could no longer quite meet Juna's eye for a different reason than before. And Vesna, who had spent 40 years certain she was the last and the forgotten, who had made herself a ghost story so the loneliness would at least be on her own terms, discovered in the thin, false warmth of a deceiving early spring that she was neither last nor forgotten, only lost and now found, and that there had been a whole community of her own people a half-mile down the hill the entire 11 years, who would have come gladly, if only she had not driven the world so hard from her door. She said as much to Juna once, dry as ever, watching a young orc woman she'd sent away twice now leave eggs on the step a third time. "All that biting," she said. "All those years I bit first, so none of them could bite me. And they were down the hill the whole time, waiting to be let near." She turned the bone fishhook on its nail with one knotted finger. "You could make a hard lesson of that, girl, if you were the lecturing kind. Don't." But the spring was false, and Juna knew it, and the docker's kindness could not buy what no kindness buys. The warm days came too early and meant nothing. Juna had nursed enough winters to know the cruelty of a false spring, how it coaxes the old and the weak up off the cot and out into an air that turns on them by night. The cough that had torn upward through the wall for a season changed its sound. It went from the tearing wet of a chest fighting to the looser, wetter, settling sound of a chest that has stopped fighting and begun to fill. And Juna, sitting with her one night while the old docker dozed in the corner, heard it change, and knew it for what it was, and knew that the community had arrived in time to honor Vesna of the Coldwater clan, but not, now, in time to keep her, and that the thing she would have to do next was not nurse the old woman back, which was past doing, but make sure she did not die the way the building had always wanted her to. Juna stopped pretending the soup was extra. There was no more need for the lies now, and Vesna had no more breath to spend refusing them, so the nursing came out into the open at last. The thing Juna was best at in all the world, done now not for a stranger on a ward who'd be gone by morning, but for the one person on her own landing she had let all the way in. She propped the old woman high against folded clothing so the filling chest could drain what it could. She kept the fire steady day and night and let the building think what it liked about her coals. She wet the cracked lips and worked the liniment into the knotted hands that no longer gripped the stick because the stick was finished, and so, both of them knew it now, was the walking. She did the small, relentless work of keeping a dying body as easy as a dying body can be kept, and she did not lie about what it was. Vesna would have despised a lie. "It's pneumonia," Juna told her plainly when she asked, because she always asked plain. "The chest's filling. I can ease it. I can't stop it." And Vesna had nodded, satisfied, the way she was only ever satisfied by the truth, and said, "Good." "I'd not trust a nurse who'd dress it up." The dock orcs kept vigil now in shifts, without being asked, the way coast people keep a watch. Never the room left empty, never the old woman left to a long silence with only her own chest for company.
The old docker came each evening to talk the coast tongue low into the failing light, and Vesna answered less and less, but always turned her head to the sound of it, the green water word, the last thing that still reached her clearly. The young woman with the eggs sat the dawn watch. Rek came after his shifts, still in his dust, and sat awkward and huge on a stool too small for him, this young man who had spoken of her as a grave he walked past, and now could not make himself leave her side. It was Rek, she asked, near the end of a clear, thin afternoon, to carry her to the window. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, which by then she nearly did. The powerful shoulders Juna had glimpsed under the papery skin gone to almost air. And he held her at the casement Juna had propped open to the unseasonable warm, and from the top floor, over the slate roofs falling away to the harbor, you could see it.
The gray curve of the seawall, taking the afternoon light, breaking the lower town off the cold sea exactly as it had for 40 years, exactly as straight as the day the last stone went true. Vesna looked at it a long time. She did not say anything sentimental. She said, in the rags of her voice,
40 years, not shifted a hair.
And Juna understood it was the proudest thing the old woman owned, and the closest she would come to a goodbye to her own dead, who were in that footing, who were that wall. Then she said she was tired, and Rek carried her back and laid her down as gently as his big dock hands knew how. That night, lucid in the way the dying sometimes surface clear before the end, Vesna sent the others out to the landing for a moment and kept Juna. She lifted one knotted hand toward the nail by the shelf.
Take it down.
Juna took down the bone fishhook on its worn cord and put it in the spread palm. Vesna closed her fingers on it, the last fine grip those hands would make, and then she held it out to Juna.
No,
Juna started.
That stays on its... It stays nowhere now. I'm finished with nails.
The cloudy eye and the sharp one both held her. Don't you make a deathbed sniffle of this, girl. I'll know, and I'll haunt your wall. I'm not giving you a keepsake. I'm giving you a job. She pressed the small carved thing into Juna's chapped hand and closed both her ruined ones around it. This is the last one, last hook of the Coldwater clan, carved by a hand that's 2 generations in that footing now. While I had it, it was the last of a dead thing. You keep it, the breath sawed, and it stops being the last one. You wear it, and it's just a hook a living woman wears, and somebody asks her one day what it is, and she tells them who built their wall. That's all. You keep the hook, you remember who built your wall. She let go. And one more, one promise, and then I'll have your soup.
Anything you want.
Not anything. One thing. The voice gathered itself for it. I don't care about a stone for me. I'm not the point and never was. But that wall. A breath. 40 years they've had it on the seal and not one name at the foot of it. My clan stood in that killing water and went into it nameless, and the city's been proud of them every day since without knowing it owed them so much as a letter. The sharp eye burned. You make them say it. Somewhere. In writing, where it can't be whispered away. Who really built the seawall? I don't ask you to win. I know what you're up against. A nurse and a handful of dockers against a city's pride. I ask you to make them say it. One true line, carved where the lie is. Promise me that. And Juna,
holding the last hook of a dead clan in a hand that had closed 100 strangers' eyes, looked at the old woman who had bitten first for 40 years, so no one could see how the loneliness had hollowed her, who had mended a dead man's coat in the dark rather than be caught being kind, who was asking with the last of her breath, not for herself, but for the nameless in the wall. And Juna, who had crossed a country to never owe anyone anything again, made the promise. "I'll make them say it," she said, "in writing, where it can't be whispered away. I promise you." Vesna nodded once, satisfied by the truth of it, the way she was only ever satisfied by the truth, and let her head go back against the folded clothes and said the soup could come in now, and so could the others. She'd been quiet long enough.
She went out 2 nights later, in her own bed, in her own time, with the window open to the sea. There was no drama in it, and Juna would not have allowed any if there had been. The dying that is done well is mostly quiet, and this one was. The cough had eased toward the end, the way it does when the body stops spending itself on fighting, and the long, settling breaths had spaced themselves wider through the small hours, and Juna, who knew the rhythm of it the way the old docker knew the tide, had felt the room change before the last breath came, that particular thinning of the air she had no word for and needed none, and had reached and taken one knotted hand in both of hers. So that when Vesna of the Coldwater clan went, on a thin spring night with the warm air coming in off the harbor, she did not go on to a cold floor that no one would cross a landing for. She went with a human nurse holding one ruined hand, and the old docker holding the other, and speaking the coast tongue low and steady, so the green water word would be the last sound to reach her. And the young woman who'd left the eggs at the foot of the cot, and Rek filling the doorway with his cap in his big hands. The room that had held one bitter woman alone for 11 years held, at the end, all the people she had spent 40 years certain did not exist. Juna felt the hand go from a grip to a weight, and she did the last small thing, drew the lids down with 2 fingers the way she had for 100 strangers, and this time it was not a stranger, and she let her own face do what it wanted, and no one in that crowded room thought the worse of her for it. It was a death. Juna would not let anyone pretend it was anything else, least of all herself. It was sad, plainly and rightfully sad. A woman gone, the last of a people, the last hands that read that stone, the green water word now truly homeless in the world. But it was also, and at the very same time, the thing Vesna had asked for, and the only victory the story had ever promised. It was good. It was the exact opposite of the death the building had wanted for her, and she had braced herself 40 years to meet. Alone, uncounted, managed into the ground by people glad of the bed. She had died known. She had died held. She had died with her own language in her ear, and her own people filling the room and the wall her clan built standing straight in the window. Juna had nursed enough endings to know how rare that was, how few got it, how many of her ward deaths went out into the dark with no hand at all. And she sat in the quiet after, with the bone hook warm against her own throat where she had put it. And she let it be both things at once, sad and good, because the truth was always both, and Vesna had no patience for anything that wasn't the truth.
The coast people did the rest in their own way, and the building was made to watch. They would not let her go down the back stair like a thing being removed. They carried her down the front, the main stair, the one the landing had whispered on. Slow, caps off. The old docker leading and Rec taking the head of the plain coffin the dockers had built in a day from good dock timber. Generations of orcs lining the flights with their hands open in some old gesture of the coast. And the building's humans had to come to their doors. There was no avoiding it. You cannot not hear a clan carrying its dead down a wooden stair.
The pale woman stood at her door with her hand at her mouth. The man from the third floor took off his own cap, not knowing he did it. The rent woman stood with her ledger forgotten against her chest and watched the curse she'd counted the weeks out of the world go past her door honored, borne by her own people, 3 generations of them, down through the building that had decided she did not count. And there was nothing for any of them to do but witness it. The funeral honors of a woman they had called a curse, carried past their doors in plain daylight by people who knew exactly what she had been. No one defeated them. There had never been a villain to defeat, only a comfortable collective unkindness, the averted face and the lowered voice, and it was not beaten in any clean way that a story likes. It was simply shamed into silence by the unanswerable fact of a life that had turned out, against everything the building had assumed, to matter, and to be mourned by more people than most of those whispering would ever manage to gather to their own doors. Have you ever stood at a door like that, at the edge of a grief you helped make, with nothing to do but witness what you got wrong? I think the building learned more on that stair than in all its comfortable years of whispering. I think some of them carried it down with them and didn't put it down. If you've stayed with Juna and Vesna this far, stay for the last of it, because the promise still has to be kept, and the keeping of it is the whole point of why I wanted to tell you this one. Subscribe, sit with me through the end, and tell me below, who's the person you wish you'd witnessed properly before the stair? Up at the top of the house, when it was over and the room was empty and swept, Juna stood a moment by the thin wall that had carried a kettle and a stick and a cough for 2 years and now carried nothing. The silence on the other side was a different silence than the dreadful, untouched bowl silence of that first dawn. It was just quiet now, a finished quiet. She put her hand flat on the plaster the way she had that first frightened morning, and she felt the bone hook against her throat, and she did not knock. There was no one to knock for. But there was, she knew, a promise, in writing, where it can't be whispered away, and that was a thing she could still do, and the only thing left now that she could do, and she meant to do it. Spring came on proper after that. The real thing this time, slow and unglamorous. The harbor losing its gray, the dawn market putting out the first soft green stuff. And Juna kept the promise, the way she did everything, without heroics and without quitting. She was no one's idea of a person who moves a city. She was a tired night nurse from a charity ward with no name and no influence, and the harbor board was a city's pride in a paneled room. And the first time she went to them with the truth of who built the seawall, they were polite and they did nothing, which is what such rooms do. The second time, they were less polite. There was no document, they said. There were no records of the clans. The wall was the city's achievement and always had been, and a nurse's second-hand story off a deathbed was not a thing one carved in bronze. Juna had expected exactly this. Vesna had told her she would not win, and had asked her only to make them say it. And Juna had learned at the old woman's fire that there is more than one way to get a hard thing done. So she stopped petitioning alone, and she did the thing that worked. She brought the dockers. Not a mob, Vesna had taught her that too, but the slow, dignified, unanswerable pressure of the orc community itself. The old docker who could name the dead clans in the coast tongue. The working men the harbor could not run a single tide without, standing quiet and respectable and immovable at the edges of the board's comfortable room. And she let the city's own memory do the rest, because the funeral had been witnessed, and witnessed things do not stay quiet in a port quarter. And the embarrassing public fact of an old wall builder carried honored down a tenement stair by 3 generations of her own people, past the doors of humans who'd called her a curse, had become a thing the lower town talked about. The board did not want it talked about further, and so, to make a small awkwardness go away, they did a small true thing, which is how most true things get done. They set at the foot of the seawall 1 modest plate of bronze, no bigger than a book, naming the orc clans who built it and died in the building of it, the cold water people first among them. It was tiny. Juna knew it was tiny, 1 small plate against a vast and comfortable forgetting, a city that would go on putting the wall on its seal, and the clans would go on being a line most people walked past without reading. The story knew it was tiny, and let it be enough, because Vesna had asked only that they be made to say it once, in writing, where it could not be whispered away. And now they had, and the green water dead had a letter at the foot of their wall, at last. But the deeper thing that had changed was not in bronze, it was in Juna, and in the building. She had crossed a country 2 years before precisely to never do this again, to never let a person matter, never sit a vigil, never pay the cost she had paid for her father and been hollowed out by. And she had paid it anyway. She had let an old woman behind a wall all the way in, every step, right to the hand going from grip to weight under her own. And she had grieved her fully, the way she had been too frightened to grieve anyone since her father. And she had not been destroyed by it. That was the thing she had been most afraid of and most needed to learn, and Vesna had taught it to her without 1 kind word. That you survive the loving and the losing both. That the vigil empties you and you fill again. That the alternative to the cost is the 4 cold walls and the no one who notices whether you live. She was no longer the stranger on her own landing. The pale woman nodded to her again and meant it differently now. The building had changed, too. The old, easy cruelty had broken on the rock of 1 death witnessed, and a place cannot quite go back to whispering once it has stood at its doors with its cap in its hand. On a clear spring morning, coming off a night shift, Juna walks down to the harbor the long way, the way she has started to. She stops at the foot of the seawall where the little bronze plate catches the early sun, and she reads the clan names again, the way she does most mornings now. The Coldwater people, first line, in letters a city was shamed into casting. The bone fish hook hangs at her own throat on its worn cord, just a hook a living woman wears, and one day someone will ask her what it is. Down the quay, Rec and 2 other dockers are heading out to the morning tide, and they see her there at the wall, and they nod. Not the nod you give a do-gooder, not gratitude, none of that. The plain, flat nod you give a neighbor you'll see again tomorrow. She nods back. That is all it is, and it is everything it is. Up in the tenement, Vesna's old room is not standing empty for the rent woman to let with a sniff. A young orc family has it now. Dock people, Rec vouched for them. A man and a woman
and a small one who has already learned to thump the floor for the joy of the sound. And Juna, without being asked, without a word, has already left a covered bowl of barley and bone soup on their step at dawn, knocked once with the back of 2 knuckles, and gone into her own room before the door could open. Through the thin party wall that, for 11 years, carried only a lonely stick at night, tap, drag, tap, there comes now, faint through the plaster, the ordinary racket of a household beginning. A kettle, a child, 2 voices that have not yet learned to lower themselves on the stair. She lies down in the daylight to sleep, and she listens to it through the wall, the family she is going to know. She did not gain a household of her own, or a love, or a clan. She gained the one thing she had spent 2 years building walls against and needed more than any of it. She let someone in, all the way to the end, and survived the losing of them, and came out the far side no longer a stranger to her own landing, having learned the thing the old orc taught her, and never once said kindly, the thing Juna understands fully now, lying warm behind the wall with the bone hook at her throat, and a new family's kettle singing through the plaster. That you do not leave the bowl on the step to save the other person. You leave it so that neither of you dies a stranger.